What is going on, guys? Welcome back to the channel, and today we're going to be doing another weapon breakdown for Battlefield 2042, this time covering the weapon that is probably my favourite assault rifle in the game, the AK-24. In these weapon breakdowns we're going to be going through a bunch of stats that you guys need to know, such as rounds per minute, reload time, bullet velocity, damage over distance, bullets to kill over distance, and time to kill over distance as well. On top of those stats we'll then go over the recoil pattern for the weapon, and then lastly I'll go over 3 unique loadouts that I've crafted for specific playstyles, for those of you who aren't 100% sure on which attachments to use. Before we get into it, if you guys do end up enjoying the video, then be sure to leave a like down below, and if you are new to the channel, then definitely hit that subscribe button and turn on those notifications, as there's going to be plenty more content like this on the way in 2022. With that being said though, guys, let's get stuck right into my weapon breakdown for the AK-24. So the AK-24 is obviously classed as an assault rifle, and you unlock this bad boy at level 11, which is really early considering how solid the weapon is. It has a magazine size of 30 plus 1 in the chamber, and it fires 649 rounds per minute. Now for its reload times, it takes 2.3 seconds for a tactical reload, which is when you manually reload it, or it has an empty reload time of 2.86 seconds, which is when it automatically reloads after running out of bullets. As for the velocity, it sends its ammunition down range at 640 meters per second, which is actually the second fastest out of all of the assault rifles, only 20 meters per second slower than the SCAR. Now getting into the more detailed stats for the AK-24, keep in mind that these values are all based off of body shots, and when it comes to assault rifles, headshots have a 2 times multiplier, so any value that you see in these graphs are just doubled when you land them to the head rather than the torso or the limbs. The AK-24 deals 26 damage per bullet up to 9 meters, then between 10 and 49 meters it drops down to 22 damage per shot, and then at 50 meters and beyond it drops down to 18 damage per shot, so it has a nice smooth drop off when it comes to the damage. As for the bullets that it takes to kill over distance, it takes 4 shots to kill up to 9 meters, then between 10 and 49 meters it takes 5 shots to kill, and then at 50 meters and beyond it'll take 6 shots to the body to kill an enemy. Lastly, moving on to the time to kill over distance, it kills in 277 milliseconds up to 9 meters, then 369 milliseconds between 10 and 49 meters, and then from 50 meters and beyond it will take 462 milliseconds to kill. Obviously these stats do vary quite a bit once you account for headshots and missed shots like I mentioned, but assuming you hit every shot to the body at these ranges, then these stats are accurate according to that situation. Now moving on, we have the recoil pattern for the AK-24, and as you can see it has a really nice vertical recoil pattern that doesn't really involve too much horizontal recoil at all. It is probably one of the easier weapons to handle in my opinion, and I think that's what makes it so enjoyable to use, because it does feel like one of those weapons that is actually working with you rather than against you, if that makes sense. This is just the factory AK-24 that I'm showing here, and I do have some videos on the channel covering some different attachment types and how they affect recoil and the overall weapon behavior, so be sure to check those videos out as well. Now moving on, like I mentioned, I've actually crafted 3 different loadouts that I often like to use on the AK-24 depending on the mode or the map or just how I feel like playing in general. So if you're not 100% sure on what attachments to use, then hopefully this can give you guys a good starting point, and then obviously these can be slightly altered and adjusted to your own preferences, so these are by no means set in stone. Also keep in mind that you can obviously bring 3 attachments per slot in the plus system, so technically you can bring all 3 of these loadouts along and change them on the fly. The first loadout that I wanted to cover is the close quarters build, and this one just makes the AK-24 a little bit more viable at close range. Now it is still very much a mid to long range type of weapon, so this isn't going to turn it into an SMG or anything like that, but it is still just the best loadout that you can really use for these close quarter situations. For the sight I use the Fusion Hollow simply because that is the one that I like the best. It has a nice clear sight, which is always the best option for close quarters engagements. For the ammo I use the extended mag, and the reason I choose this over the drum mag is because it has a much faster reload time, which is going to be a lifesaver in those close quarters battles when you don't have as much time to actually reload before the enemy pushes you. For the underbarrel I use the Rattlesnake light grip, which is now an obvious choice if you've seen my video on the underbarrel attachments and what exactly they do, so be sure to go and check that one out if you haven't already. Lastly, for the barrel I use the tactical compensator, which just reduces the horizontal recoil ever so slightly, and as you saw from the recoil pattern earlier, that does come in handy with the AK-24, giving it essentially only vertical recoil, and that is obviously much easier to handle. Now moving on to the second loadout that I wanted to cover, this one is the laser beam build, and this one is just built for accuracy, not for any specific range though, so I've pretty much tried to balance the accuracy in general across all ranges, and this is pretty much the build that I run about 75% of the time. For the sight I use the Fusion Hollow for the same reason that I mentioned before. For the ammo I use the drum mag, as I do prefer having those extra 10 rounds despite the slower reload time when I'm using it at that sort of mid-range, unlike the last class build. For the underbarrel I use the rattlesnake light grip again, and then lastly for the barrel I use the extended barrel, as this just increases the velocity of the weapon at the cost of a slightly slower rate of fire, and that slower rate of fire actually makes it a little bit easier to handle when it comes to the vertical recoil. Like I said, this build is definitely my go-to. The extended barrel does technically increase the time to kill because of the slower rate of fire, but I do find myself being far more accurate with this build, and therefore that pretty much reduces my time to kill despite the stats saying otherwise. Now lastly for the third loadout, this one is the long range build, and this build is absolutely dominant at long range. Now what I will say about this build is that it is a little bit tough on the recoil when you're using the AK in full auto mode, so I would actually recommend switching to semi-automatic when using this, at least at long range anyway, because I won't lie, there is essentially no recoil whatsoever when you use the single shot mode, and with these attachments and the single fire mode, it's going to pretty much outsnipe anything other than an actual sniper. For the sight I use the TV 2x scope, as that is just my personal favourite when it comes to adding a little bit of extra range. For the ammo I use the high power rounds. These just make the bullets a little bit more effective at range, which is exactly what we're going for with this build obviously. For the underbarrel I use the LWG light grip. This one is the best when it comes to those more stationary gunfights, which are generally how you're going to be playing at range. And then lastly for the barrel I use the extended barrel once again, as this does just increase that bullet velocity, and the slower rate of fire isn't really even a factor in the single shot mode anyway, so there's pretty much not even a downside to this one. Like I said, this build is absolutely mental in the single fire mode. The attachments make it about a 4 or 5 shot kill at mid to long range, and with how little recoil there is on it, you're going to be dominating anyone who's not built for a long range battle. So that is pretty much it for the AK-24 guys. Personally, I really enjoy using this one, and like I said earlier on, I think this is probably my overall favorite assault rifle in the game, and probably up there in the top 3 or so weapons in the game overall. So definitely give this one a try if you haven't already. Up next, I'm hoping to cover the MP9 for the SMG class, but other than that, let me know what weapons you guys want me to cover next, as I'm largely going to base them off what you guys want to see the most, so be sure to leave some recommendations down in the comments section. If you enjoyed the video, then be sure to leave a like down below, and if you are new, then consider subscribing to the channel with those notifications on. If you guys want to support the content that I make here on YouTube, then consider becoming a channel member. But with that being said, thank you all very much for watching. You guys have a great day, and I'll see you all out there on the battlefield.